All right, so Catholics think that they're the only real Christians that are the good ones.
They think they're the only true church.
Okay, so is being a Christian who is a Catholic different feeling than being a Christian who isn't a Catholic?
Maybe.
Okay.
That way. Maybe. Because I think it depends like on the person, right?
Okay.
Because again, we just talked about how the Catholic Church is built around all these sacraments, right?
Right.
So it's real in-depth sacramental theology. I think one of the things that happens in some Catholic churches, and maybe not others, is an emphasis on one's own personal relationship with Christ.
Okay.
Well, here's what I mean by that. So as a Protestant, I'm talking about, when I say a personal relationship with Christ, I'm talking about, I have time where I'm sitting, I'm reading the word, I'm praying, I'm, fasting, whatever it may be. I'm, what I believe, cultivating a relationship with Christ. Okay. Like I'm getting to know his voice through the Spirit. He's hearing mine. There's this intimacy that can be found in Christ.
Okay.
And I think for the Catholic, it probably depends on the Catholic church that you're attending on if that local priest is talking about Christ and your personal relationship with Christ in that manner. Or is it just built around coming and partaking of Mass once a week?
Okay.
Right? I think that can be a difference. But I also have seen other churches that fall into the same thing, especially, churches that have a high liturgy, kind of value, where it's about showing up to church. It's about being part of the liturgy, but then you're never really, no one's ever talking to you. Your pastor there in that church is not talking to you about how to develop and cultivate a personal relationship with Christ.
Okay.
And why that matters. And I think that for some Catholics, and again, I'm not saying all, but for some, the idea of that, the communal nature of coming together, worshiping together, taking Mass together is such a high value that you can just simply not talk about personal relationship with Christ. Oh. And I think that can be different, right? I've got other family members who have come out of the Catholic Church into a Protestant church, and that's one of the things they would share. They would say that they felt like, hey, growing up, it was, or even as adults, it was about going through sacramental motions, and they never heard the connection of personal relationship with Christ beyond connecting with him in the Eucharist, for example.
Okay.
Whereas, in the Protestant church, they're being told, hey, you can wake up every morning, have your devotional reading, you can read scripture, you can pray and talk to the Lord. And so I'm not saying that doesn't happen in Catholic churches, okay? I'm just saying I think any kind of church that's high liturgy, high sacrament, has to be careful to where that's not the only picture of relationship with Christ that is conveyed.
Do you think that, Protestant churches have a only picture of the way Christ is conveyed, and the Catholics would say the same thing right back at you?
Yeah, I was actually about to say that.
Okay.
I think that in the Protestant church, I think we can so harp on the personal relationship with Christ, those kind of things. I think you would find it would be really, it's like you hear some Protestants be like, oh, I don't really need the church. Right? Because they're so heightened on the personal relationship with Christ. Right. I can just have a personal relationship with Jesus. I don't need the church.
Right.
And Catholics would be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Right. And so no, you gotta have the church. And so I think that would be one of the things they would critique us on. And I think it's a healthy critique, to be honest. And so, but then I also do think that, again, one of the things that in a lot of Protestant churches is that we don't have a high value for communion or the Eucharist. And the Catholics and my Anglican brothers and sisters who are Protestant, but they're Anglicans, they would have an issue with that. They would take issue with our real low value of communion and the Eucharist.
Okay. Because we do it in 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, we do it, and I think...
And it's in sippy cups.
Yeah. Well, we do it through intinction of dipping the bread into the cup. And then taking it that way.
Not the little
not the little
prepackaged grape juice wafer.
Yeah, that
things.
that's, and I've done it, and that's been done in other churches too. And boy, especially during COVID, I mean, that was everybody did it that way. And then I think for a lot of churches, they just continued on to do it that way. But yeah, no, I think that's part of, for the Catholic Church, we're taking of one bread, we're taking of one cup. Like that's a big deal,
Yeah.
And so, but no, I do think that the low value of the Eucharist is a major critique from Catholics toward us. And I think it's fair that even though I don't agree with their theology of Eucharist, in other words, I don't believe the bread actually becomes the flesh of Christ. I don't believe the blood or the wine actually becomes the blood of Christ.
Okay.
I do believe that there is a mystery that's happening there where Christ's presence is there, and that it is a means of grace. And so one of the things I've tried to do at our church is allow people to take some time of reflection before taking communion, and then saying, hey, let's make sure we're quiet. We get still, we be silent while we're taking communion. Like, in other words, no chit-chatting, no just kind of side conversations, like on your way up to take communion. And because I think that can take away from what's actually happening here.
Okay, so if you were going to try to be objective.
I'll try.
Would you say that the Protestant emphasis on personal relationship with Christ is more important than the Catholic emphasis on liturgy and Eucharist and all that stuff?
Ooh, no, I would say the Catholic emphasis on Eucharist and the Protestant emphasis on personal relationship with Christ are probably at the same level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's why there's that disconnect there sometimes.
Okay.
Because
I mean, like, which one do you think God thinks is more important?
Oh, which one do I think God thinks is more important? Yeah. Oh, so not just what I think.
Yeah.
Oh boy. I mean, I'll put it this way: for the Eucharist to matter, we have to know Christ.
Okay.
But at the same time, I'm saying that, and boy, I'm going to get killed for that statement. But at the same time, when I'm saying that, I realize that people can come to know Christ via the Eucharist.
Okay.
In other words, it can be a means of grace in which someone comes to know him. But even for Catholics, there's a reason they go through confirmation before taking Eucharist.
To get to know Christ?
To get to know Christ.
Okay.
So that's why I say coming to know Christ is objectively more important than taking Eucharist, even though I see the value in the Eucharist.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say, for me as a Protestant, that's changed for me over time too.
Do you think that their emphasis on that is a problem? Or is it just a different way to do church to you?
Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah, I think they would say it's a different way of doing church. Like they would say, for example, we build our services around communion.
Yeah.
Like everything leads up to the Eucharist.
Yeah.
Okay. And by the way, Anglican churches do the exact same thing.
Okay.
So that's there on our Protestant side as well. But then I think that
that's every week they do it.
Every week.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So you have weekly mass.
Yeah.
And so I think that for Protestants, most Protestant churches have built their service around the sermon.
Right.
Now that might differ with my charismatic brothers and sisters, and I know I'm a charismatic too, but they would say the worship time.
Yeah.
What they would call the praise and worship time.
Yeah.
That's the most important part of the service.
If that goes for 5 hours and we don't get to the sermon, whatever.
Right. And actually it was probably more spiritual if that happened. Yeah. And so I think that all I'm saying is I think different groups do value different things.
Okay.
And so for example, the Catholic Church.
And you don't think that any one of those values is more important than the other one?
No.
Or less important?
Less important. Yeah. And see, I guess I would say I wish that we could value all of those things equally. Like, I understand it's interesting because in the Catholic Church, you've got the lead up to the Eucharist, right?
Yeah.
Or the Anglican Church. Like, I've got a great friend who's an Anglican priest, and he talks about all the time about the Eucharist and leading up to the Eucharist and the importance of that. And he really has had an impact on how I value the Eucharist, just because the way he shares about it, talks about it. Like, it's like, I see where he's coming from in it, right? So it's all gearing up to that. For like the church I'm in right now, and
it kind of sounds like a spiritual experience.
Yeah,
leading up to that and doing that.
Yeah. I don't disagree.
Yeah,
I don't disagree. And so, like, for me, in the Methodist tradition, the Methodist tradition is interesting because everything really does lead up to the sermon, right? Like all the service is like, it leads up to the sermon point.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of you have the sermon, and then you have what we call the call and response. Like, in other words, I have given the call through the sermon. Okay. Now you need to respond to it. And we do like one final song to allow people to kind of reflect on what happened in the sermon, or come to the altar in response to the sermon. And so there's this call and response, and the sermon really is kind of like the center point. Again, for the charismatic churches I've been in, the worship experience was the thing, right?
Right.
So that would go on for however long, and whether the service was good or not was all hinged on that experience.
On whether God decided he was going to show up that day.
Right. And I've got my own critiques of that, because I think that's a terrible way to talk about church and God, right?
Well, I don't think he was, and nobody ever will acknowledge when they think he didn't come.
Yeah,
they only acknowledge when he did.
Yeah. Well, no, I've heard it.
Oh, really?
I've heard it as a pastor of a charismatic church. People come, like they were like, "We just missed God today."
Well, that sucks.
Yeah,
God must hate us.
They would be like, we were just this close. We were this close
because you guys did too many sins this week. That's the problem.
or that the pastors jumped in and cut off worship too soon.
If we had just done it 5 more minutes,
we would have been. God had been there. Revival would have happened.
Yep.
And, yeah. I mean, I've personally heard that critique, and so all I'm saying is, and I think that for me, I want to view worship as all of that. Like, from the moment we come into the doors, in other words, like, everything we're doing is worship. It's not just the singing. It's, I talk about it like we worship through song, we worship through giving, we worship through the word, we worship through communion. Like, all of these things are acts of worship.
So you should have a church with 10 rooms.
We just move people through the rooms.
And you just come and start walking through the rooms, and if you want to hear a song, you can go hear a song. And if you want to get baptized, you can get baptized. If you want to eat the blood, you can eat the blood.
Right.
And it's like a different, it's like a haunted house, but it's not haunted. It's haunted by God.
It's a holy house.
Yeah. You walk in a room, there's just a guy mixing up.
No.
So there's equal emphasis on all the things.
No, I don't think because I think if you separate them, people are just going to go to what they want to emphasize.
Exactly.
No, that's not good.
Togetherness.
No, togetherness would be we're all together. We're going to have all of these elements, and we need to learn to value all of them the same.
No, my way's better.
No. And so, and it's interesting because in the Methodist tradition, we only do communion once a month. And that's normal. Like, now I have talked to some that grew up in a Baptist tradition where they only took it once a quarter.
A quarter?
Yeah.
Every 3 months?
Every 3 months.
Oh.
And then, of course, and I've got my Anglican brother over there who's like a priest, and he's just like, man, y'all aren't doing it once a month. Like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
And so anyway, I think that
we do it 10 times a day.
We should learn to value each of these things.
Okay.
As part of our worship experience. And I think they're all objectively pleasing unto the Lord.